We're makeshifting it tonight or this afternoon. Call to order for Watertown City Council meeting for October 15th of 2025. We're going to do a pledge and a prayer anyway. I don't care.
Okay.
So, Dan, your call.
Okay. Heavenly Father, thank you for, again, this day that you've given us to go about this life and the business that you call us to, each one of us individually. And now we gather in this room, in this facility, in City Hall, Lord, to work through the budget for the city, to work through the restaurant liquor license, to talk through that, Lord. And these decisions affect many people. So I just ask, Lord, that we work together as a team, as business owners, as city employees, as the governing officials, and you name it, residents of the city, and just pray to give us wisdom and guidance. And all this in your name, Lord Jesus.
Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Finance Officer Bob Zine, please call the roll.
It feels weird, no microphone. Okay. Shetty?
Here.
Allen?
Here.
Boyer?
Here.
Pauline?
Here.
Mormon? Absent. Jurens?
Here.
Peters?
Here.
Thank you.
Quorum is established. Chair will entertain a motion to approve the agenda with one change. We're just going to flip A and B around.
So you need a
That
motion? Make a motion.
Motion made by Councilman Peters,
Second.
seconded by Councilman Allen. Any discussion on that? Hearing none, the motion is to accept the agenda. All those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries. We'll go straight into the agenda, and first will be a discussion on the first reading of the ordinance revising chapter 2.02 of the ordinances of the city of Watertown regarding the on-sale licenses for full-service restaurants. There's going to be some information shared at the beginning, and I think I will go to City Manager Steger to explain what we're trying to accomplish here.
Great, thank you, Mayor. As we look at potential changes to the language in ordinance, I think it's 25-21 that has been proposed. We have two paths to go through to effect a second reading and then ultimately an ordinance. So path one would be to continue along the path that the ordinance is on, which had a first reading on the 6th of October and a scheduled second reading on the 20th of October. And continuing with no changes then would allow the council to make revisions to that ordinance at the second reading on the 20th, which then would require a 5-day waiting period before calling a special meeting to vote on the revised ordinance with changes, in which case it would then go through notification and publication with effectivity on the 14th of November. The second path is if I actually mix those two paths up as I look at my dates here. So to back up a little bit, continuing on the path that we are on with no changes to the ordinance would not require an intermediate reading, and we could have an ordinance effective on the 14th of November. If there are any changes made or desired to be made to the ordinance, those changes will be made at the second reading on our next meeting on the 20th of October. And then following that reading and those changes, there's a 5-day waiting period. After the 5 days, we would call a council meeting on the 27th to ratify the ordinance as changed. It would then be published and go through a 20-day referral period and be effective on the 23rd of November. So the two options really, I think, before the council are as follows. If you choose to effect no changes to the ordinance, it follows through the normal process and would be effective on the 14th of November. If you desire to make changes, the earliest effectivity would be the 23rd of November. So those are the two decisions that you have to weigh.
And to provide a little bit more information, just for anyone who isn't following, at the last council meeting, some questions were asked in regard to some language. I was trying to get the exact paragraph, Councilman Allen, if you'd note. Basically, there was 3 words that we were debating: mind-altering consumables, I think is the correct terminology that I had. I wanted to first clarify something that was not put in by any single employee. It was done by several members of the staff to just try to come up with something that would provide a clarification on restrictions. I will tell some more information as what I learned. City Manager Steger learned about the process. I have called the Department of Revenue, the South Dakota Municipal League, and the Attorney General's office. I don't think that this language alters the ordinance in any way, because the Department of Revenue classifies THC infused beverages as soft drinks, which means they would have absolutely no, this license, one way or another, would have absolutely no bearing upon that. It would not restrict, it would not permit, because at the state level, they're not even classified. So the Attorney General's office and the Municipal League also have no classification on them. So we can keep the language in as is, and it does not further restrict a license. The conversation was, are we creating a separate license? No, we're not. If anything, we're bringing to light something that the state might have to learn, might have to weigh in on it sometime in the future. But as of right now, the infused beverages are considered soft drinks, whether that's right or wrong. So for the city of Watertown, this ordinance, as far as our understanding and the understanding of the people that I talked to out in Pierre, would have absolutely no impact upon this. Our city attorney, Carrico, also learned a little bit something about possible definition on the mind altering thing, if you wanted to weigh in on that.
Oh, when we were, when I was doing some research, mostly having to do with, liability and that sort of thing, but the case laws out there almost include alcohol as part of a mind-altering substance. So in all reality, we're saying the same thing. It's alcohol. Alcohol can be mind-altering. Type of alcohol. Now that's just used in case law. It wasn't in, because obviously the statutes, their specific definitions are usually things like barley is for this and so much alcohol content over this. But when it comes to certain, what we're going to call mind-altering beverages, alcohol can be considered that depending on type of alcohol.
Your interpretation on the ordinance as presented is, in regards to the THC, is it doesn't, there's no case law on that. Okay. So what we're facing is we have no case law telling us otherwise. We have all the entities out in Pierre telling us that the language that we have, whether it's there or not, does not affect it. And the city manager tells us if we want to amend it, then we are going back to a first reading and we are pushing it back several weeks. So that is the information. And really the conversation on this is going to be more dictated to the council, not on the pros or cons on the ordinance in general, but upon the timeline and the procedure going forward in regard to, let's say, finalizing the debate that we had on the November 6th meeting, or the October 6th meeting, sorry. So that is what we're really trying to determine here as far as what council's decision is. Do you want to go back to a first reading on this upcoming Monday? Or it basically accept the language as it was presented on October 6th, in which case we're going to a second reading next Monday. Or if you want any changes, we are going back to a first reading. Correct? All right, Councilman Allen.
So there is, if we make any changes to this ordinance as it currently stands, it requires a first reading. So it doesn't matter what we change in the ordinance. Even if we corrected a spelling error, we'd have to go back to a first reading. Okay, that's not correct. So the correct response is any substantial change. So in other words, if we simply remove language, that's a substantial change. Is that correct? So any language that gets removed is a substantial change. I'm just trying to clarify it because from my perspective, the last time we met, it seemed like that the answer was that if there was a substantial change to the ordinance, then it might require a first reading. But we vacillated on what was substantial and not substantial. So is there any clarification with regard to that other than just sort of, well, we kind of think it's substantial or it seems substantial? What is the ruling on that?
So if I recall during the last meeting, I basically advised that you are defining what a full service restaurant is. So if you start deleting stuff in the definition, then you are substantially changing the ordinance because, because the entire ordinance is based upon granting a full service restaurant license. So if in this definition you've created, this is our definition of a full service restaurant, well, that is a substantial change. I'm sorry, but it is. Now, there was discussion though about changing definitions, right? And that could be perceived as not substantial. Yes, there could be situations, I don't know what they are because it hasn't occurred, but because in this particular definition, this is the ordinance. It's about a full service restaurant. So we have to tell them what it is. And if you start changing that, then that's a substantial change. Things that aren't a substantial change are, let's say when we put it out there, we said you need to go to the finance department. And then we realized, oh no, you need to go to the finance officer. It's just basically the same thing. So that would be a minor change because we're not real. Now, if we said, I don't know, something about what goes into the percentage, that would be a substantial change. If we changed a timeline of 5 days notice to 3 days notice, that would be a substantial change. I'm trying to think because I did send something to the.
As you're going back to that, Councilman Allen.
Yeah. Okay. So part of my confusion is that Mayor Holeen said whether we have that language in here or not makes no difference. So from my perspective, regardless of whether it goes back to a first reading or not, and certainly we can bow to the city attorney with respect to that, I would argue we need to strike that language, the language that was added last minute that we didn't have any discussion about. And it's not a quarrel about who put the language in there. It's the language itself from my perspective. And I would argue mind altering is not accurate. It doesn't, no one's mind is altered by alcohol or a THC infused drink. It might be intoxicating, but it doesn't alter your mind. It doesn't change your mind, in other words. So that's one aspect of why I would argue that we strike the language and we go back to a first reading. The other argument is that we also added some additional things in there. An establishment that provides recreational activities. We never defined what that was. So I'm not sure that people would really know what a recreational activity would be. Would that be foosball? Is that a recreational activity? I don't know. The other thing is the language says permits gambling. So a restaurant with this permit could not permit gambling. Now that's not video lottery. We've already said that's not allowed. So what would permitting gambling mean? Would it be, shake of the day? Is that gambling? what exactly are we restricting when we say we can't permit gambling? Can they do a Super Bowl board? Oh, yeah, that seems like gambling. How about a raffle? I don't know. It's not clear to me. And then there's the whole piece of the mind-altering consumables or inhalants. And again, I don't know what a mind-altering inhalant would be when we've already prohibited smoking in restaurants. So you can't really inhale anything. You can't use a vape. You can't do any of that. So what's a mind-altering inhalant? I don't know. Is that huffing paint? I really have no idea. So my argument remains, and that was part of my argument the other day, is that I think we need to strike the language. I don't think it adds anything to the ordinance. And Mayor Holeen said it doesn't matter if it's in there or it's not in there. So I would argue we strike that language. I think the ordinance as it stands is pretty restrictive. You have a 60-40 split. You can't do video lottery. You have to advertise only as a restaurant. You can't transfer the license, so I can't go off-site and cater a wedding or do anything like that. It seems pretty restrictive to me already. So I don't think we need to raise the bar any higher. That's my argument. So
And I'll open it up. I just want to make something clear. And I know that you didn't mean this. I'm not saying it doesn't make a difference. What I'm saying is when I made calls to entities out in Pierre, they have no different classification for it. So the information I am getting from the Municipal League, the AG's office, and the department, most importantly, the Department of Revenue, because both the Municipal League and the AG's both said, talk to the Department of Revenue. I did. They classify all THC drinks as soft drinks, at least as far as what they were telling me. So it wasn't me saying that that's what I'm hearing from the state.
but your conclusion was
Yeah.
that it won't make a difference if the language isn't in there. So I'd argue we strike it.
City Manager?
The finding that you've had, Mr. Mayor, is regarding THC drinks.
Yeah.
THC drinks are not mentioned anywhere in the ordinance, and so the ordinance is pretty broad on restrictions, right? So I agree. I think the finding is correct in THC drinks. I think the question for the council to wrestle with is, do you want the ordinance to have restrictions on products and substances that we may not even know of today? Or do you want to go back to a pure statutory definition of a restaurant that was in the initial statute? And I think either one of them accomplishes what we want to accomplish. Going back to the pure statutory definition would delay the effectivity of the ordinance by up to 9 days. Trying to play around with or leaving the language as it is would accelerate the effectivity by about 9 days. I think that's what you have to wrestle with.
Council, opening it up.
I'll win.
Councilman Jurgens.
I completely agree with what Doug is.
Councilman Howard.
Yeah, I've been practicing this. Practicing.
Doesn't sound like it.
City Manager Stager, Councilman, I'm lying to you. But I have been. I even worked on it yesterday when I was speaking to the mayor. I believe that it should be struck for a lot of those reasons, but I also believe that it's not going to change things in the long run, and that if it looks like it's changing things, we could strike it at meetings in 6 months from now or 3 years from now. I'm going to trust that it's really not going to affect really at all. I'm going to trust your research. I'm going to trust your research. I'm going to trust your research. And I'm going to trust your legal advice. We debated this for, someone counted 72 minutes a week ago or 9 days ago. And we could get into a whole bunch of digging and quarreling and things, but I'd like to hear what other councilmen are thinking. If they feel that it needs to be struck as strongly as what Doug is thinking, I would go along with that, even if there's a delay. That 9 days isn't the worst thing in the world to do that either. So Doug did a really nice job of sharing the feelings that I had 9 days ago, and I've seen some and had some dialogue between then and now, and I really think there was a lot of things put in there that really just didn't need to, and I think you kind of alluded to it. I mean, they really didn't need to be put in there, but you know what? Not everything we get in life is what we want. So, anyone else? I'll pass.
Just to make one more thing clear, and then on Councilman Peters, but both, several of the entities are looking into it more. In regard to the Municipal League and the Attorney General's office, their first reply was, wow, we've never had that before. Never, I mean, it hasn't come up. It hasn't been something that they've been considering. They both said we would have to look into it a lot more to find out if there's anything that we're even dealing with in regard to this. They both told me call the Department of Revenue. I had already done that. Department of Revenue says it's a soft drink. So, Councilman Peters.
Do you mind if I just follow up? That even questions me more why that was put in there. Like, where did we find this? Anyway, that's it.
Councilman Peters.
I know Councilman Hoyer wants to talk too, but I was going to say, do we want to open it up to the public as well for their feedback? Or do we need to deliberate on this for a while and make a decision?
I can. I was looking a little, we're not talking necessarily the ordinance in general. We're talking about the specifics, but I could definitely see, because I see we have two people who have weighed in on the ordinance in general. I'm trying to limit it more specifically to the infused drink conversation, because that's where it got, that's where most of the conversation from the October 6th meeting was revolving around, in regard to whether we move forward with the ordinance as written, or do we need to change the wording of the ordinance? So I see two people well known to the council, but I don't want to assume that you want to speak. But if you or anyone else would like to speak, I would gladly give you that opportunity.
I've got nothing to say on the THC stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, that's not my game. I don't sell the stuff, and I don't care to sell the stuff. So
I guess the question is if all of you got the email, what's the difference between, okay, so at the last council or the last work session, you guys stated that Jennifer had to call around if one of these licenses comes into factor, and she would have to ask the license holders now if their license is for sale. Well, I guess as of right now, my license is for sale, and so that person who is looking for that $50,000 license, mine's available, and I'll buy the $50,000 license. Was I wrong there? Was that not said at that meeting?
You're right, but there's also a follow-on that there has to be a meeting of the minds in terms of price on the license. So although you may make
on
it
our license,
your license,
so why? My license should be what I stipulated is. Correct.
but if the potential buyer is not willing to pay your price, then they come to the city and say, we've polled the existing license holders and we can't come to a meeting of minds on buying a license, so we want to apply for this restaurant class license.
Okay. And then so you just take money out of my pocket.
No, I think it's more, sorry, I'm gonna jump in. I think it's more so like if you, and this isn't you, if a license holder was like, it's worth $1 million, you gotta have some form of recourse that it's at least like of market value. I would assume that's where that comes from.
Okay, so let's say I paid $250,000 for my license 25 years ago. Sure. I was selling drinks at $3. Now I'm selling drinks at anywhere from $5 to $10. Well, the inflation of the drink shouldn't run my liquor license down, price of my liquor license, right? So if it costs you X amount of dollars to build a car, now it costs you more, do you drop the price of the car you're selling?
I'm not dictating that. I would say that it's probably based more so what was the last one sold off of. Like
I want to just remind everyone, There's a reason why whenever we have conversations, it goes through the chair so that you do not get into personal conversations or arguments.
But it's that,
And
it's just,
I understand,
you-
but please.
you know, just like when you drop the one to $100,000, so, or 125, you just took $125,000 out of my pocket. So if I were to go to the city and say, wait, I'm not gonna pay taxes anymore until I reach my $125,000, what's the city say? No, you can't do that. So why is it okay for the city to take money away from me to allow somebody else to have an easier way into my business? So who are we helping here? That's what I'm looking at. It's like I said to him, it's like you're regenerating the rules of a baseball game. You got two teams that come to the plate. This team, you guys, when you're at bat, you're gonna run all the bases. This team, we're gonna have you start at third, so when you hit, you just have one base to run. You see where I'm saying?
Yes, but
I'm just saying, let's make it fair for everybody.
yeah, and.
The restaurant business isn't for everybody. It's a risk. It's the number one failing business out there. There ain't too many banks that'll borrow you money on a restaurant. So that's my say. I'm trying to just hold on to my business, but it seems like the city's trying to run me out of business.
Can I add, Alan, where is that stated? What you just brought up about if it comes to the meeting of the minds?
That phrase came from our city attorney. I don't recall if that's in statute, but the original statute did lay out the person who wants to buy a license needs to go out and see if anybody's willing to sell one. And that's the requirement they go through first. And if nobody's willing to sell one or the buyer isn't willing to pay that price, then they can come and apply for the restaurant liquor license. I will say that statute is a little convoluted like everything else related to these licensing laws, which is probably why we haven't had anyone try to do it yet.
So that buyer would have to go knocking on doors asking, are you gonna sell? Are you gonna sell? And are you gonna sell?
So,
Yes.
okay,
Before the paperwork is done? Are there any of the licensing?
We haven't been through that yet.
I'm gonna
Then that's-
stipulate something here. I know this is a work session. I know it's a little more informal. There's a reason why I didn't go to any of the councilmen when they had their hands raised on something that you said, because we are not going to get into a debate. That's not what these meetings are for. We have a procedure that we follow exactly for this reason, so that we can be professional and respectful and keep the decorum. So I would ask in your questions, what I've always done is if there's a question that's asked, I write it down and I make sure that it gets asked. But I've always avoided anybody, and this just happens to be the most recent example. And I know that there's a lot of emotion on this because we're talking about a lot of money, and I would call it a pretty big change. So I understand that people are emotional about it, but that is exactly why we have to follow the procedure that I am trying to follow. So please respect that. So I would ask if you have any more questions, address them to me and I will make sure that they get answered. And then also with council, if they have a point on something that you said, then I would ask them to also do likewise back to you. It's just a good professional safeguard. So any more questions that you have in regard to in any aspect of it?
I got no more questions.
So I will go in order. Councilman Peters, you basically just, was your hand raised to go to see if we wanted public testimony?
Yeah, what do we hope to accomplish? Are we looking to accomplish?
What we are
the
looking to
language?
accomplish is to figure out if we are going to change the language as presented at the first reading on October 6th. We're not necessarily talking about the general merits or demerits of the ordinance. The debate as we finished on October 6th was basically, okay, we have some questions in regard to the language. Do we keep it in? Do we take it out? We basically left that we were going to keep it in for the time being, but we weren't exactly sure what would happen. We felt we needed to resolve this. So that's why we put this on the agenda. It's not necessarily talking about the ordinance at large, but it's talking about the language. Councilman Hoyer.
So all I was going to say on it is that I just feel it is our duty as council members to write good, strong ordinance, the best we can do before we pass it. I think that leaving the language in sets a bad precedent on our behalf when we know it's language that is meaningless and pointless fluff. And it makes more sense to remove it. I mean, I'm the kind of person where I can resist eating the marshmallow and wait for the second marshmallow so we can delay gratification on it. But like, again, the point is it's 9 days. I don't think that's a big enough buffer to cause that big of, like, even if somebody's trying to get something going, I don't think that's a big enough hiccup to really merit pushing this off. I'd say just strike it, let's do it right, and then move forward. And then speaking of doing it right, in the restaurant definition, if we could correct the spelling of restaurant, that'd be lovely. It's in the middle after gross revenue of the restaurant.
Councilman Shetty.
So per this restaurant ordinance, you know, one of our goals as we kind of have vetted this out was to set this apart from the actual liquor license, right? The restaurant liquor license. So this may answer one question from earlier. It'd be like a baseball league, but starting up a slow pitch softball league. It's 2 different leagues. It looks the same, but it's 2 different leagues. There's even some different rules. So what I'm getting at is it's a different product. The goal here was to set this apart versus the actual liquor license and what that all, you know, gives a person an advantage to utilize. So as we're talking about the language now, you know, and how we go about the process for the language, just one, I don't want to get into debate on this per se, but just bringing it up. For example, if one of the newer places in town, Infinity Fun, if they, would they be able to utilize this as a restaurant license? That's why do we got to consider that in the wording? So that way, what's our goal, I guess, as a city in establishing this restaurant license, to set it apart from the actual liquor license holders, like with the video lottery and some other scenarios, hours. And really, this is about food, right? You're going to be making your percentage of money on food. So, again, we're talking a lot about the 40%, but it's about restaurants. However, we have to have this conversation, right, to set it apart. So that's where the wording, as we're talking about, does it help set it apart a little bit? For my example, I brought up a place like Infinity Fun. The THC drinks, if they are intoxicating, if you will, I guess if you need you need to be 21 to purchase those drinks. Is that correct? Sounds a little bit more, doesn't sound like a soda to me. Even though the state might be still juggling that and haven't figured that out. So if indeed there is if it is intoxicating, it doesn't inhibit driving, well, then either we include it as on the alcohol side, or we eliminate it from that establishment potentially. So the great conversation and debate on how to get there, but that's why I think that wording is in there, is because it is intoxicating. So we're not talking about a soda. So that's just, anyway, that's again how we go about getting there. If we want to delay this to get it right, if we feel like keeping the wordage the same, I'm not a big fan of striking all the wording in there personally myself. I'd rather keep some of that in there, unless someone else can answer that question about, for example, a place like the THC or the Infinity Fun, those kind of places. So how it affects those establishments.
Councilman?
Again, when I say it's fluff, it's because, as the mayor pointed out, it doesn't have legal standing under state statute. So if somebody pushes back on it, you don't have a case. According to those definitions, essentially, potentially you don't have a case. Because if they're classifying it as a soft drink, then that's what it is. I agree. I think it's goofy. That's why I said in the last meeting, I thought it was odd that Minnesota was ahead of us in actually defining these things and having legislation for them. And for some reason, state hasn't really done much with it. Maybe this will start them to do something with it. But ultimately, I'm kind of nervous about what Doug was getting at, recreational activities. I think of shuffleboard. Does that disqualify somebody then? So if you think of the sandbar, or even the prop has shuffleboard, is that a recreational activity? the gambling thing I get nervous about too. I think being specific with video lottery is one thing. I worry about like people doing charity pull tabs, or like somebody is going to do a chase the ace or something. Like, does that void them out from that kind of stuff? And because we're creating what we think is better language, I just think it's so broad that like we're not actually defining anything. And so then it becomes this giant blanket that's just going to blow up in our face later. I worry sometimes when we get ahead of things that state hasn't gotten on, it creates situations like we kind of saw with like the dispensaries and stuff where we had all the contention there. So I'd rather have the state have defined these things to inform what we're writing if we're going to restrict. But again, it goes back to that 60-40 split. I think that's harder than some folks, again, think. I think the original ordinance was pretty restricted anyway. Us taking away the video lottery, even more restrictive. Us taking away their ability to transfer the license, even more restrictive. Like, they're going to operate as a restaurant. That's all they can really do with it. You're not going to be doing some crazy happy hour thing, I don't think, unless it's apps. But anyway, that's just my 2 cents on it. I'd rather we just write the best defined bulletproof stuff we can and don't create a potential issue in the future with that coming back at us until we have some backbone to it that we can actually stand with. But that's me. Thank you, Mayor.
What do you think, Mayor?
I would say if there's questions about the language, I care about the language in any law, because I've seen how even legislative intent, for lack of a better term, can lead to ramifications way beyond the scope. Might be an extreme example, but if you go back to the early 2000s, possession of drugs for meriting time in prison was passed. How it was then interpreted is if it is in your system, that is possession. So that was not what the intent was in the original debate. But as the law was written, and I'm not saying that's good or bad, I'm just saying that's the way that it has, and I think it's probably been good, because if someone's going around stoned and they're maybe not committed a crime yet, but most crime, or a lot of crimes, are committed by people who are going around stoned, it's probably a good idea that you can, say, okay, we're going to arrest you so that you don't do something else wrong. But you can go way back to the early 2000s when that was passed. And that was really more of a clarification on what possession meant, but they didn't. How it was interpreted after the fact was, if it's in your system, that is in your possession. So language does matter. I will say, if we're going to open it up again, I'm going to just verify the interpretation of what for sale meant, because I was the first one who ever brought that up, because in my mind, everything's for sale, in which case this entire ordinance could also be completely defunct. Because if you go back to the original South Dakota law, if the interpretation is, if a license is for sale, then you can't purchase one of these. In my mind, everything is for sale. So we're going to have to define what for sale means. I'm just saying, we've gone down a road with this ordinance, and I'm not a fan, but I figured that it might create some issues. I didn't anticipate this many, but I guess if we've gone down this far, let's make sure it's right. Councilman Peters.
So just so I'm understanding, so you're suggesting that this mind altering consumable should come out? Is that what you're saying? And go back to what I think.
My interpretation from the sources that I talked to was it's redundant and unnecessary and unenforceable.
Okay. Yeah, I guess maybe my comments would be, I think we're losing focus a little bit of what we were supposed to be discussing, and we're getting down a rabbit hole of this language. And if I'm hearing that it's not necessary, I would have to agree that we should go back to the original definition and just do it right the first time. Because I think it's a bad look if we're all sitting here with doubt already saying, well, it doesn't mean anything. Well, then why would we have it in an ordinance? I can't think of any other ordinance that we would otherwise approve if we didn't understand it. So I want to make sure that, unfortunately, we're dealing with this now, but I don't see this as a timing issue. I don't want to just punch this through just to punch it through. I want to make sure that it's right because I think that's our responsibility. And so I think we need to settle this argument because we're going to have another discussion on the fee itself. And I think the more time we spend on this, the less good conversations that come out of the fee because we're going to be frustrated with this ordinance. So my suggestion would be to put it back to whatever I have written down here is the pure statutorial definition was. That would be my recommendation.
All right. Anything else, council? I'm going to.
I do have a quick question. We had the 6 criteria that, as a council, you agreed on would be the criteria that separated the 2 classes of licenses. I think we need to look, if we strike that language, do we still accommodate this 6 criteria, or do we need to add something someplace else? I don't have it in front of me, but I recommend we look at that first to be very clear before we make any change.
City Attorney Carrico.
Originally, or my understanding from the council was the surprise was the mind altering language. Part of the reason staff had developed the definition in addition to what statutorily was the definition with regard to recreational activities, and was because of the very first conversation we had about this ordinance, where then we were trying to explain to the council that they needed to hold themselves out as a restaurant and not something else other than a restaurant. And then there was discussion amongst the council of, well, but the Infinity Fund, I feel bad that we're picking on Infinity Fund, but it's the best example, or Legends, but they serve barbecue. So it's not just hamburgers and salads. So they should be a full service restaurant. And I believe I had indicated at that time, okay, but they're supposed to be primarily a restaurant, not these other things. So then that's when staff and council was like, yes, we need to put in these restrictions. We have more restrictions because we're trying to differentiate it from a full service or a standard liquor license. Okay, great. So staff goes in and they came up with this definition. And it was one of the bullet points, I believe, when we presented it 2 meetings ago. And then obviously in the definition, though, we had added the mind altering. There had been some other things that had occurred between the last council and the one where we presented it. Staff got together, we inserted the language. Obviously council was not aware. So now council's like, we don't really like that part. That's fine. We'll take it back out. So my question is, are we saying that we're now going to get rid of the recreational activity aspect? Because if we are, either we're policing it and not being clear to the public. So then we're coming forward saying, yeah, Infinity Fund, sorry, you don't qualify because you're not really holding yourself out as a restaurant. You're holding out as a family entertainment center. And getting into that discussion with them, or do we include it in the definition so that we're being transparent with the public, or we're saying that they can have one. Well, there's 3 different ways to look at it. The interpretation's coming back to the city, being me having to tell someone, yeah, even though it doesn't say recreational, we're not interpreting you as a restaurant, Infinity Fund. Or do we put it in the language so everybody knows? Or do we say, no, he can have one? That's what I'm asking. And there's no right or wrong for us. We just need to know what you guys want. We made our suggestions, but now you guys need to tell us. And I'm sorry to open that up, Mayor, but that's the crux of it.
You know what I'm going to suggest to council, if we're going to wipe this all off, I think we're probably going to go back to, I don't even think we're gonna have a first reading at Monday because we've got so many questions that I think we're gonna have to answer. I'm just saying, I don't see, everything just brings up more questions and I'm just not sure. Councilman Hoyer,
I'm fine sitting down and going through it again. I just need to know what you guys want.
Councilman Hoyer.
I don't think it does that first. Second, Infinity Fun, they don't have servers, so they already don't qualify as a full service restaurant. They don't have waiters or waitresses that come up to you, deliver food. You have to go to a counter, you order at a counter, you pick it up there, and then you take it to your table. Not a full service restaurant by state definition. So that's not the issue. But when it comes to the 6 items, I mean, I'd be satisfied with your guys' stuff there. Like if you just list your 6 items that are restrictive, like literally as we talked about them, they were pretty clear. It was video lottery, wasn't gambling, it was video lottery, you know, and stuff like that. Like it was specific in your 6 listed things. Just use your 6 listed things. Don't broaden it up, but that's, you know, just my 2 cents. I think it's pretty cut and dry what you had.
Councilman Peters.
Can I quick, not to add further confusion, but as I read this ordinance, if you read it in a paragraph and you just read one paragraph, it doesn't tell the full story. But if you read the whole ordinance and it starts talking about what a restaurant does, has dining room or rooms, kitchen, whatever, 60-40 split, it kind of answers those questions for us as it goes. And so I get what the city attorney is saying, and she needs direction for sure. But I feel like it's there. And I feel like it's not that hard to interpret who could do it or who can't. And what Councilman Hoyer just said about Legends or Infinity Fun is correct. I mean, having been there, there's no servers, there's no, like, it's not a restaurant. And that's pretty clear. And I think that they would agree with that. They're not a restaurant. They just serve food. So I think that we're probably farther along than we think, is my point.
I think, Councilman Allen, before I call on you, I would say, I was trying to show respect for 2 people who are in the room. And by doing so, I think we have shown disrespect for a whole lot of other people who are in the room, who are waiting on a budget hearing. And that is our main job here today, is the budget hearing. I'm going to have to say, let's finish this up. So Councilman Allen, I can let you speak, but I'm going to say Councilman Allen is going to make a motion to go back to a first reading, strike, basically kill the ordinance as presented on the 6th, because we have to. It has to be rewritten. It has to go back to a first ordinance. Whether or not we take 99.9% of all the same language, it's still going to be a first reading. So the motion is to basically take it back to a first reading.
I'm not sure you can kill it today.
Yeah.
At the second reading.
Yeah. So basically we don't even need official action because it's going to be listed as a second reading on Monday and we're going to vote it down. Question is, do we want to have a first reading on on a revised ordinance, basically with the same language?
Is that the motion you're asking for?
I don't even think we need a motion because the second reading is going to come on Monday anyway.
Yeah.
The question is going to be, do we want a first reading?
So we don't
in
need
which
that.
case there's no reason to take an official motion to say, bring a first reading.
I don't think any action is required
Yeah.
tonight, but also on our next council meeting, I think the motion is at second reading to amend the language, present the substituted language, wait the 5-day period instead of going through an entire first reading, second reading process. Because then it's after 5 days is ratification instead of a second reading.
That's the statute.
Got one right.
And I read it.
Okay.
Councilman Allen has a question.
Mayor Olin, I don't so much have a question as, from my perspective, I'm just asking for the elimination of the language, one sentence It says an establishment that provides recreational activities, permits gambling, or provides mind-altering consumables or inhalants in addition to selling food is not considered to be a full, that's the language I want struck. That will be what I would propose for the next council meeting, is that we make that change. And I agree with others, Councilman Peters and Councilman Hoyer, with regard to, I think we're fine with the rest of the ordinance as a whole, really adding the restrictions that we put in. They're very clear. I think we're accepting of that. And I think that would be the way to move forward, so we can then have a discussion on the fee amount.
And I apologize. I think that there's just a lot of frustration on my part. This has been one of those things where it's
okay.
Yeah. So anyway, I apologize. I don't think I necessarily lost my cool, but
no.
But it is time to move on.
Just one question on how we move on the fee discussion. The next step in this process is to bring forward a resolution that specifies the fee. Assuming that at the next meeting, we get language that passes, we could bring forward a resolution at the next meeting. Or since we're going through the effective waiting period, we could come back on the 3rd of November and have the debate and discussion on the fee. So I'd ask for guidance on direction of when you'd like to have that discussion, number one. And number two, as a staff, what can we do to prepare each of you in advance to have the discussion on the fee, so that we can try to get through it once?
I would hope that we could have the discussion of the fee next Monday. That's when most people are going to show up from the public, and that's when the work's going to get done. We're going to see the final language and have the discussion on 23,600, 25,000, 35,000, 50,000, or leave it at the same at the 100.
Council, anything?
Mr. Mayor,
City Manager.
I would recommend then that we bring a blank fee resolution forward, which is blank, just with the dollar amount that needs to be specified. And at the meeting, a motion can be made to specify that dollar amount, if that's okay.
Okay. All right, thank you. Moving on to a city manager's budget discussion.
Thank you, Mayor. So this is our second work session with the 2026 budget. There, my screen wasn't advancing. So everything that's in gray are the topics that we discussed at the last work session on the budget. If you look at this session, I'm going to go through the assumptions and then talk about the various funds in some degree of specificity. The next step in the budget process for the year will be to bring forward a budget hearing and a budget ordinance at the 2 council meetings in November. Before you have a couple of pieces of paper as well as a presentation. One is just a snapshot as shown on the screen, showing some key highlights of the budget that we are proposing for 2026. And then secondly, you each also have a very detailed report of every line item in the budget for 2026. Don't intend to go through this in detail tonight. Obviously, if there are questions or the need to go and look for support in any of the numbers, we have it in front of us. So for purposes tonight, staff and I intend to walk through at a summary level what we are proposing for 2026 to allow you the chance to ask any questions and to align on what you'd like to see in the final ordinance. 2026 budget assumptions. So as we look at our sales tax revenue and fees, we are budgeting very, very limited sales tax growth in the budget. And we're doing that to be conservative. Some of us listened to an economist last night on a pretty dismal outlook for the regional economy. We don't know where the next year is going to go. And so we thought it'd be prudent to just keep our revenue expectation fairly low. We'll say that a management philosophy that's a little bit different than we've had in the past is I view a budget as a commitment at a point in time. And as we go through the course of the year next year, as situations may change and we may need to make updates, I don't view it as a negative to bring a budget supplement forward to you as a council with a clear explanation of why we are looking to change course. But at this time, what I wouldn't like to do is to move forward with lofty revenue expectations, have a staff out preparing a spend plan in line with lofty revenue expectations, only to find out 3 or 6 months into the year that that's not a realistic assumption. Also, our property tax is projected to increase about 5% year over year, and that's both the inflation allowed by statute as well as growth on new properties. We also have some modest fee increases built into the enterprise funds. For the most part, these fee increases are in place to cover debt service requirements related to the SRF loans. And so predominantly that's a wastewater fee increase going up $4.31 a month on a typical residential bill. $3 of that is to cover the debt. Secondly, solid waste recommendation from our consultants on the rate study is to go up an additional $1 or about 5.4% in solid waste fees next year. Any questions on the revenue side? We will go into some detail as we get into it. We'll pause there. Next, in terms of personnel, we are not planning any net new additions in the budget for 2025. In fact, with some reorganization between Public Works and the City Manager's Office, we're actually reducing by one position in 2025. In terms of our part-time positions, we are continuing to fund part-time positions at the level required in the past, which are quite variable, especially in the park and rec area, as our seasonal needs and park and rec needs change in terms of the part-time positions. We are adding a function within the police department. It is a community service officer position. Actually, 2 of those is a part-time position, and these are new positions that will allow us to provide a bridge career, especially for a recent technical school graduate who may not be 21 years of age yet. So they don't qualify to become a sworn officer. However, in these positions, they would be able to provide a valuable service for us. So we are proposing that. Our overall compensation, we're proposing an increase of 3.5% on wages and compensation. However, the net to the city employees actually going to be better than it has been in prior years at higher wage rate increases because our cost and our employee contribution for fringe benefits has remained unchanged in 2026. Some non-personnel expenditures, we have gone through line item by line item detail with each department head and also their respective managers to look at both the inflationary adjustments on spend as well as increases required to provide their services. As I mentioned before, viewing the budget as a plan at a point in time and recognizing the need to adjust to circumstances throughout the year is an important part of our philosophy in managing the budget. So we will have monthly reviews between the city manager, finance, and department heads in 2026. And also we'll be working with the department heads that before we have significant deviations, we're having a discussion. So the cultural shift is just because it's in the budget doesn't mean expense approval exists. And this will allow us to be able to adjust on the fly as we need to. Just a reminder, the primary revenue sources for the city include our sales tax and our use tax. That's the first and second penny that we talk about. Our property tax, our BBB tax. And then as we go through this, I will say this could be a bit confusing if you don't live this every day. But within our various funds, we've got various transfers in and out. I will do the best that I can to try to explain the transfers and the impact. We have our CFO to help when need be. But I will recognize it's not straightforward and clear. And so please ask if it's not clear and we will go out of our way to make it clear. And then obviously charges for services, fees, permits, other miscellaneous taxes are also part of our revenue source. So jumping into the revenue side, we will go through a series of slides looking at the major components of tax revenue within the city that we are anticipating. You'll notice on a few of these, there's a number up in the upper right-hand corner. That number is going to refer to some charts that we see in a couple of future slides. So you'll see this is the trend in our 1 cent sales tax over time. And so you'll see as we had pretty substantial growth of almost 5% in the post-COVID era. It was pretty typical, and then we flattened out in terms of sales tax revenues. We are anticipating only an average annual increase of 2.3 percentage points in our plan going forward. And that is compared to the 7% year over year we have been seeing. So again, a very conservative approach on the revenue side. Our sales tax base is anticipated to be $1.128 billion of activity in the community next year. So if we subtract out the BBB sales tax, we're just under $1 billion of sales tax activity in the community. And I bring that up for this reason, just draw your attention to a little bit of math. We have 23,500 people in the community. On a per capita basis, there's about $42,000 of spend happening. Now, I think we can all just look around and recognize we don't have $42,000 spending for everybody in the community. So this reflects the broader regional economy that we have with people coming into the community and spending money in our community, as well as our manufacturing, construction, and wholesale businesses that not only pay sales tax, but also a use tax and some of their consumables. Any questions on our sales tax assumption or desire to go a different direction? Yes.
City Manager Stanger, I want to go back to the a couple of slides ago, and I'm sorry, maybe I missed this, but the projected wage and compensation increase of 3.5%, has that been, and maybe you said this, but has that been negotiated with our various unions, or are we in a process?
We are in a process. We are clear with one union, close to clear with a second. And the third one was supposed to meet last night. They're having a problem getting a quorum. And so at this point, in good faith, we're trying to get to this number. I think it's a fair number, especially in light of being able to provide a comprehensive benefit package with no increase in premium. Union representatives, although they haven't had a quorum to ratify it, have indicated they think we're being fair.
Good. Thank you for that.
The BBB tax. So this is the additional third penny that is applied to some of the restaurant services, alcohol sales, lodging. We're anticipating a 3% year over year growth. Again, we've seen higher than that in the most recent years. What this really means is we've got 135 million, or about 10%, a little over 10% of our sales tax base in the community is derived from the BBB type of activities. This activity generates $4.1 million a year between the 3 cents of sales tax on about 10% plus of total activity. So it does remain a very important part of the economy of Watertown. And as we get into investments that we make with the CVB and the Chamber of Commerce and others, that is really in support of driving this type of activity. Talk next about our property tax. So property tax, after applying the guidance in recently enacted state statutes, we're getting about a 2.9% inflationary increase and then a little over 2% on real property growth. The mill levy at this point is an estimate, as the county has not completed the assessments and compiled the numbers yet for the 2026 mill levy. However, we have certified, and as a council, you certified the request for $4.7 billion in property tax.
They're only city manager Steiger. So is there a timeline for the county to make that determination, or?
I believe they work around a rendition date of November 1st, in which case it'd be, I would imagine, a couple of weeks after that to certify it. From our standpoint, the dollar amount is clear. We've passed the ordinance that we're going to ask for. Where this becomes important is, as you look over on the right side, we've had a decreasing mill levy for quite some time, essentially since the event center bonds were paid off. It's been in a steady decline. In fact, I believe of the first-class cities in the state, by far we are the lowest mill levy in property taxes. We anticipate that when the county work is done, we'll be just under about $3 billion of property valuation in the community as you look at that. So outside of the taxes that we raise, we also supplement our general fund by transferring dollars in from the enterprise funds. And so as you look at the city, the really 3 enterprise funds of significance that we have, actually I'll say 4 that we have, include our solid waste utility, our wastewater utility, our municipal utilities, and our airport. Of those, we do have healthy enterprise fund activity to justify some transfers into the general fund in several of them. From municipal utilities, we receive an annual transfer every year of $1.5 million. That was negotiated in 2023 with municipal utilities, and I believe is a fixed or has a slight percentage derived increase each year for the next 2 years. Also at our disposal is to transfer funds from wastewater and solid waste. And you will see that starting in 2024, that level was raised to be about 1.6 million a year of transfer as those funds have been able to support it. We've had just a moderate growth on that up to 1.7 billion. So this is the total picture of transfers in from enterprise funds. And hold this thought. Later in the presentation, I'll call your attention back to it. If I forget someone, please remind me. Because what you will see is a deficit in the general fund. And the reason why we've got a deficit in the general fund is we run excess funds in other funds that we sometimes tap and transfer. And this is all part of a bigger piece of puzzle that's tough to put on a slide or a piece of paper. So just have you hold that thought until we get a little later in the presentation. Dig a little bit deeper, because later in the presentation we go through the enterprise funds, but we don't go through Watertown Municipal Utilities. This is a chart showing the line showing the transfer in from municipal utilities over time at roughly the $1.5 million level. And then also showing the amounts that we pay as a city out of the general fund, principally to Watertown Municipal Utility for, in the green bar, services provided. So that's all of the utilities at our various parks and facilities, totaling 1.5 million a year. And that's up 40% since 2021, as we've added some utilities that are pretty big consumers of electrical power and natural gas. Also, there have been a few rate increases in there. Secondly, we also pay municipal utilities in the green bar for the rent of fire hydrants and also the street lights in the community and the operation of the street lights. And that's just under $1 million a year. So to put those two numbers into perspective, our general fund expenditures are 25 million for the year. So we have right here 2.5 out of 25 million really doing business with ourselves. So keep that in mind as we go further into the presentation to ground what it means to be out of balance in the general fund. Any questions? This is our total general fund revenues. And we'll summarize these on a future page, but you'll see we're pretty flat across all of the areas of spend. A couple of things I'd bring up as you know, where we're not flat. The license charges declined from 2024 to 2025 and 2026. We had a big year of building permit activity in 2024 that's reflected in there. The other is something I can't read my writing, so our CFO may need to help me out here. Those are primarily interest amounts. And then in the intergovernmental, those are amounts generally that we receive from the state through things such as liquor license taxes. There's a fire insurance tax, there's a wheel tax, and small items that are relatively consistent each year. Any questions? I'm going to jump ahead to general fund expenditures, and then we'll, within a slide or two, bring both pieces together. So our expenditures, we are planning, you can see by major area of government, you're seeing very minimal growth in expenditures across the different areas. Primarily what we're seeing in public safety is a $400,000 increase. It's mainly personnel services. We have 100 of our 242 full-time people in public safety, so the wage increase impacts us there. Public works, similarly, it's personnel services. One thing we are also looking at doing within streets is adding some temporary workforce in the summer months to allow us to take on some of our own concrete projects across the city where it's been tough to hire contractors. Rob and staff believe that we can just bring in a contracting crew and handle some of that on our own at a reasonable price. Also, our facilities and finance and administration, again, pretty flat. The big jump between 2024 and 2025 was a centralization of facilities management, pulling it out of the various functional areas into one group. Don't know that I'll comment on any of these any further. If there are questions about what's included in a fund, I'm sure be happy to look at it, but this total is 25.3 million for 2026, which we'll see is pretty flat compared to prior years. Any questions before I move on and talk about fund transfers?
Just to confirm, so you mentioned in, excuse me, public safety, that was wage increase predominantly?
Predominantly.
Okay.
There are other things in there, but But as you look at having 100 of 242 employees in that function, that's the biggest driver of that function because it's very personnel heavy.
I was just curious and comparing that to like culture recreation, there's a 1.1 million. I think difference proposed. No, only,
It's
okay, sorry,
100,000.
100,000.
100,000.
Calculate that wrong.
And that's primarily the library that you see in there.
Like the wage increase isn't increasing that though. I mean, that's more than just library, cultural recreation,
It's library and forestry.
and forestry, not Parks and Rec as a whole.
No, so culture and rec is not,
Okay.
it doesn't have a lot of head count in it, which is why it's.
Within the general fund. This is only the general fund.
Gotcha.
Parks, other, yeah.
Yeah,
Parks.
okay. Yeah, I look at this every day, right?
Oh, do you?
So remember, we have transfers into the general fund from the enterprise funds and also from Watertown Municipal Utilities. Well, we also have transfers out of the general fund. And the transfers out of the general fund go to our other primary areas of government where the revenues are insufficient to support that particular function. The one that receives the most general fund subsidy is consistently Park and Rec. I want to talk about Park and Rec, especially as some council members may be going through this for the first time. Most municipalities do not view Park and Rec as a self-sustaining function of government. And it's not unusual to have the transfers. What I would say is impressive here is we've been able to keep our transfer declining or relatively flat. And we're going to go into quite a bit of detail on Park and Rec. Secondly, we have an enterprise fund in the airport that loses $800,000 to $900,000 a year on airport activities. We are subsidizing that through the general fund. I will say we're not going into a lot of detail on the airport, but Ian has been doing an outstanding job trying to redevelop the airport into not only a place where passengers get on commercial flights, but trying to turn it into a hub of economic activity. And we'll have more on that in the future. I do want to talk about the E911 fund. Coming into this year, that fund was fairly healthy, so there hasn't been significant transfers. However, there have been some changes and there was a surprise versus the prior staff's interpretation of the budget and myself coming in and looking at 911. Prior manager and team believed that all of the state additional surcharge that was passed through the legislature last year would go to the cities. The reality is a portion of that goes to the cities with the state retaining, I think, 40+%. And so going forward to maintain a healthy 911 fund, we need to continue to work with the state, especially as a regional PSAP center, to ensure that we're getting a fair allocation from the state of those additional revenues, because to sustain this on our own is going to be extremely difficult. And that's why Chief Toomey sits on the 911 board to advocate on our behalf as a community to make sure that this is truly appropriately funded as the important resource it is. Final thing I'll note on the transfers out, in the early years, the Prairie Lakes Wellness Center required transfers. This is a bright spot, and we'll see that here in the future. It no longer requires a general fund subsidy to be a well-performing, viable facility in the portfolio. Any questions? Just a quick pictorial view. So on the left, it's the various revenues and fees totaling 23.5 million. Plus, in order to balance the amounts we plan to spend, we plan for there to be a change in fund balance or reserves of 1.8 million. That's reflected in the general fund, but also this point that I asked you to keep in mind, that the general fund is also transferring money out to support other areas of government, including on the enterprise fund, we've got the general fund buying services from WMU, who then holds a positive fund balance. We have the general fund transferring money out to Park and Rec, who is not holding an increasing fund balance. And we also have the airport where we're making up the deficit. So you have to consider all these flows back and forth before you get excited about looking at this and saying, hey, we're out of balance between revenue and spend. CFO, would you like to add anything, or have I captured that?
No, I think it's good.
Okay. It was a tough concept for me to understand, because if you don't live governmental accounting every day, these can be confusing concepts. Before we move on from the general fund, any questions in general? Next, I'd like to move into the Park and Rec Fund. So the Park and Rec Fund is funded on the left on various services and fees. And you'll see a pretty healthy increase in anticipated revenue in 2026. That's largely sourced from two areas. And the first is our golf course. Our golf course has been doing an outstanding job of improving the facility, generating new patrons, covering expenses, which we will see. Secondly, as the Prairie Lakes Wellness Center has moved beyond the first partial year of operation, the number of revenue generating activities in that facility, concessions to the types of events that we host, has been increasing. And so that's an additional lift up in the overall revenues. We mentioned before the transfers from the general fund are relatively flat. We also utilize the BBB fund to subsidize our park and recreation activities, and that is a $700,000 use of BBB tax revenues planned in 2026. And then just the change in the reserve fund balance. This is where Director Rodick and CFO Bob Zine and I talk about what is the desired level of reserves to have in Park and Rec. Right now, we're about 1.5 to 1.8 million. We would be comfortable dropping that down slightly below $1 million. And that's when we've got some seasonal activities that balance desired at different points in the year is different. But at least in terms of this budget presentation, continue to use fund balance to bring this in balance is something we're comfortable with. Questions on the revenue side of Park and Rec? So the expenditure side, and this is broken into major program within Park and Rec. And again, the scale is off compared to some of the other charts that we saw due to each program being a smaller dollar amount, but you can see pretty moderate growth on the expenditure side. And so the zoo, we've got about 100,000 year over year. The park system, I have to look up what the big driver is there because I haven't been keeping up with my notes.
Some of that would be staffing.
Okay.
Seasonal staffing, we increased that just because we've added Foundation Plaza, a bunch of new tournaments, so forth. River Ridge.
And I'll say this since Director Rodick has spoken and he has many of his staff members here in the room. Park and Rec is by far the most detailed and most difficult budget to go through because of the diverse things that we do there and the number of programs that we have. And so we sat in this room for about 3 hours going through the detail as a team, and then had several follow-ups with Director Rodick and others to really refine what we're doing in Park and Rec. Also going to share on the next slide some of the management tools that we have in place. So what I want the council to walk away with is if you had a perception that Park and Rec programs generate a huge amount of revenue and excess fund balance for cities, your perception is wrong. They're an important part of government investment, and we manage that very well here and very closely. Any questions before we jump into a slide that brings the revenue and expenditure side of this together? This on Park and Rec is really the unifying measurement. So if you look at the upper row, that is what a national average across municipalities would be on a measurement that we call cost recovery. And cost recovery is comparing the ratio of revenue and cost for the individual programs. So if revenue exceeds the cost of providing the program, you would be over 100% cost recovery. What you'll also see on the second and third row is where our cost recovery has been by program for each of the last 2 years, and then where we anticipate the cost recovery to be with the 2026 budget. And with the 2026 budget, to help you scale the fact that percentages may be large in certain programs, but dollars are relatively small, we put the dollars on there too. So you look across this, in almost all areas, we either exceed or we are at the national average for cost recovery providing that type of program. And as you look at comparison to prior years, we are increasing our cost recovery across almost all program activities. And so this is really showing the management that the Park and Rec team has been exercising over their individual areas of responsibility. I will, however, in the 2 red boxes, note a couple of areas of opportunity when we compare ourselves to national averages. So our recreational programs themselves, and we have many programs, and this consumed a lot of the dialogue in our 3-hour-long meeting. We're at 35% versus a national average of 40%. And it is measured at the individual activity level as well that the team has. And they use this as part of understanding what should be in the offering to try to offer the programs that generate enough interest and program service revenue to try to get us above that 40%. And sometimes they have to make some tough calls. We've got some programs that have very few participants, but cost us money, that are tough sometimes to cancel, but the team does actively look at this every year, and they try to predict where the community need and the community desire is going to be year to year. And so I think we should be happy going from 28% up to 35%. That was a pretty big jump in the recreation programs. Secondly, parks. Parks is tough in Watertown. As our staff has presented before, we have a lot of park land, a lot of park space, a lot of maintenance requirements on parks with only minimal revenue generation. Now, parks are tough for all municipalities, but especially for Watertown. And so we are anticipating a little bit of improvement at 13%, but the 2 areas of rec programs and parks is something to keep our mind on longer term as we look at where the best investment of Park and Rec dollars are for the community. Any questions on the metric or desire?
Just clarifying, I'm sure this is what it is, but with the ice arena, do we see that 57 and 24 jump to 77 just because we had a partial year?
I think that's true. We had a partial year.
Okay.
Of course, it took a little bit of time to get all the expenses in the right buckets.
Right, for sure.
I will point out something else here. This is the operating revenues and the operating expenses of the program. What is not included in the cost recovery is any of the debt service on building facilities. So that's completely outside of this metric. And so that's part of that investment that is made in the community Park and Rec and culture and recreational activities is that investment in debt service to build the facilities. Any further questions? So as we look at similar balance in the Park and Rec, we'll generate revenues of 6 million, and transfers are included in the revenue number. We'll utilize about 700,000 of reserves to spend in program service revenues, about $6.7 million in 2026. Any questions on Park and Rec before I move on to the enterprise funds? Okay. So as a reminder on the enterprise funds are the funds of government that provide a service similar to what a business would provide. So as we look at these, we think about them in terms of an income statement, like you might think about a private business. In fact, many times a service such as this in other communities might be provided by a private entity. In some cases where the numbers just really don't make sense, like a water utility, it's generally going to be the municipality. And so as we look at our enterprise funds, we have three primary funds that we talk about here. And then on the Watertown Municipal Utility, they hold the gas, water, and electric portion of the enterprise funds. But you'll see here, I'll just jump right to the profit and loss. Our three primary enterprise funds that we look at are the airport. The airport is projecting a loss of $800,000 in 2026. I will say this, that is an improved number for the airport. Airport manager Ian has done a great job negotiating the SkyWest contract. Our terminal lease rates are much better under SkyWest than they were under previous airlines. And also the commercial activity that the airport board supports bringing into the airport will help drive that number up. But I'll also say this is an opportunity to look at the airport. If we look at hangar rent, we have on a per square foot basis, some of the lowest cost storage space in the community is at our airport. So there are opportunities there to generate some additional revenue, and the team's looking at it. In many cases, we've got agreements in place so it doesn't happen overnight. The next two funds are very healthy. The wastewater fund, we anticipate will generate excess fund balance or profit next year of 3.6 million. The reason why the wastewater fund has been healthy is we've been increasing fees in anticipation of servicing the SRF loans of $45 million for the investments. So we're getting ahead of some of that. There's also a 110% coverage ratio. So we will always be building some funds in the wastewater area, which is good for us because it takes some pressure off of the 212 capital improvement fund as we look at wastewater projects such as the Kelvin Industrial Park or upgrading various areas of the community. That is a legitimate use of some of the excess fund balance there. And then secondly, solid waste. We are also in a positive fund balance position with very minimal increases in the solid waste fees. And we continue to make investments in solid waste, especially on the personnel side to generate the customer responsiveness and customer service that we're looking at from that function of government. Any questions on the enterprise funds? So total budget expenses across all of the funds. Starting with the general fund, you'll see year over year, we're really pretty flat with most of the increase in the wage and compensation increase offset by reductions in other areas to keep it flat. Park and Rec fund, in line with increasing revenues, especially in golf and the ice arena, there are some expenses required in generating those revenues. But I think as we showed with the cost recovery model, we're in at least a managed and measured place in Park and Rec. The enterprise funds are a little deceiving. because if you look at 2025, it includes the major upgrades at the wastewater facility. All of those expenses hit in one year, and the way those funds are handled, it's actually a budget transfer into the subsequent years instead of a new budget. So that one is a bit confusing. The capital improvement fund, we've gone through quite a bit of detail at a prior meeting, which is included as an appendix in the package. The special revenue funds include the cost of providing E911 services, the BBB tax, some of the TIF revenues, as well as the special project of renovating City Hall that was included in 2024 with some carry into 2025. So overall, if you look at a 3-year trend, our expenditures in 2024 were about 75 million. 2025's adopted budget was down to 72, and we are proposing a budget of 65 million of total spending in 2026. Any questions?
City Manager, in regard to the enterprise fund with the wastewater, I believe I understand it, but it's like it's on the books for 2025. It's going to be realized over the upcoming years.
Correct. Okay. Correct.
Woo-hoo.
You did
Might be ready for a government finance
Yeah.
officer's
Yeah.
training course. I'd like to switch topics here and pick up a couple of miscellaneous topics outside of going through the numbers. And one is our contribution to outside organizations. And this is an area that I know previous councils have spent quite a bit of time on. I've done things a little bit differently here. And one thing is I brought in all of our contributions, not just the general fund contributions. And so just jumping out of the total in 2025, our support of external organizations, about 1.1 million, only proposing a slight increase in 2026. Now I am proposing that we change our methodology for how we handle some of the smaller requests and smaller organizations that, quite honestly, we don't have the staff time to appropriately vet. And so sometimes it becomes the squeaky wheel that catches the right council person's ear and not necessarily going through a true vetted process in some of the smaller contributions. The larger contributions are direct contributions that we make because the purpose of the organization in some way supports some of the functions of government that we have. Principally, that's in public safety, but also in the general promotion of the community through the BBB tax. We will see some. So first of all is the Convention and Visitors Bureau. We make an annual contribution to the organization of $350,000, and I'm proposing at this time to keep that flat. As we continue to work with the organization and as their needs may change, we have the opportunity to supplement that. The BBB fund does have a pretty healthy balance, but just because we have a healthy balance, I don't think that means we should go distribute more. Because as we also saw, that fund supports the Park and Rec Fund that has some struggles from time to time. The Watertown Boys and Girls Club contribution at $247,000 per year is a contractual settlement between the organizations, so that one is fixed. The Watertown Development Company has been a 5-year pledge that we've had a couple of development cycles in a row, proposing that we keep that at the $200,000 level and meter out the payments as warranted on that. And that's actually true across all of these organizations, rather than giving a lump sum beginning of the year allocation of cash. In line with our internal management philosophy on the budget, to do these at a maximum quarterly allows us to continue to liaison and work with the organizations to make sure that they still support our purpose and that we are still healthy enough to give the external contributions.
Councilman Jurgens?
That item brings up something that I've been approached by in the legislative session. I know it's done, is where they can strike out an item if you have enough votes. Is that possible with city council? And not just that one, but others? Is there work that we can do to negotiate that number that passes the 6 or 7 of us that?
You can make a recommendation and we can have a discussion. I will consider your recommendation very, very considerately. What I would say is we will bring a budget ordinance to you. And that budget ordinance is a place where you could vote down the budget ordinance or make a change in that as well. But I would rather come to agreement and alignment before we get to the point of an ordinance. Okay.
That makes good sense.
Good.
Otherwise, it becomes, otherwise, it's not just a yes or no, we approve of the whole budget.
You could, at the point of the first reading of the ordinance, and I don't want to open up our other lengthy discussion, but in theory, you could amend that ordinance, and there are special statutory guidance provided for when you amend a budget ordinance between first and second reading that are different, and I'd have to look to the experts on that, but you do have the ability to do it. My ask would be, let's align on it or disagree on it before we get to that point, so that we've got a clean budget ordinance that we put forward.
Oh, Mayor. Thanks for that. I believe this allows citizens, or I think with all of us, more citizens to approach us about certain items on here over the next few, and what would be that
We will
date
do a
again?
first reading on, I believe it's the 3rd of November.
Okay, thank you.
Alan, one of the things that I was just thinking of here is it'd be good if we had a column that was the suggested or requested column, you know, like, for example, if the Visitors Bureau said, can we have $400,000?
No, I haven't gone out and solicited those requests.
But are they coming to
A
us?
few of them have come in. I've had conversations with the major organizations, but what I'm trying to do is to focus on running the city and not trying to be the Community Foundation or United Way, which is why you will see contributions to the Community Foundation United Way. That is their wheelhouse. That is what they are good at. So me negotiating with the community band or consuming time on $2,000 for a parade, I don't think is what you hired me for.
Agreed. What I'm saying is it'd be helpful to understand where are we landing versus what's being requested. But I understand.
Yep. The only one that's really a formalized request is the Beacon Center going up $10,000 because a significant portion of their federal funding has eroded. Others we have aligned with, at least in concept. Of course, everybody would like more, but you guys as a council need to have it before we can give it out.
Councilman Allen?
City Manager Stager, so essentially you're saying we're going to give $50,000 to the Community Foundation and the United Way with the hope that what they would do would be to respond to the other areas that exist there, Art Walk, Historical Society, etc. But there's no real requirement that the United Way or anyone else would fund those organizations.
We intend to put a service agreement in place with them. One thing, establishing certain criteria, because they need to meet the criteria that as a governmental entity we would want to fund, number one. And number two, I would propose that we put forward a requirement that $25,000 of funding is provided within the fiscal year, so that we're not going to the Community Foundation or United Way and providing money that then they just hold for future use.
Councilman Clare?
I don't know if this ties into that necessarily, but I would get and I've worked with at least the Community Foundation in the past. They're fantastic and they are good for those smaller but smaller grant situations. But, you know, in the event that's other organizations start popping up or something and start wanting to request funds, I mean, would we just have a conversation maybe with those organizations and potentially increase a little bit more in the future, or where that goes? I guess that's kind of where I get a little bit of the concern, but I'm sure that's just having an open dialogue more than anything with them and just letting them have the understanding, look, if there's higher demand and more return to the community, because they're also good at saying no.
They are, and they're really good at vetting the requests, where many of these requests have been the same amount going back a decade.
Right.
And they become not a need-based request, but an entitlement. And one of the things that the professionals and vetting organizations can do more readily than we can is they can look at the balance sheet of the organization and question, why would we give you money to just go invest it someplace? So really looking for, and through both United Way and the Community Foundation, we've got excellent community partners who can ensure that this money or contribution from the city is going to go to real-time effective programs, which is why I like it.
Just follow on. I think for me, some of the things I would want to see from some of these groups too, though, with us funding them, is maybe a presentation at some time as to how those funds are being used and a potential ROI on some of them too, just so that we know. Because again, like you said, a lot of these are still kind of entitlement feeling where they are the same amount every year. So realistically, I mean, with inflation stuff, it's less than it was the year before. And just, you know, getting a good beat on how are they being used? Is it sufficient? Is it too much? But like just getting a good situational awareness.
Councilman, I would add that that's an excellent ticket to admittance to the pool, is to at least come in once a year and share information.
City Manager Stager, I would also add that I'm sure there's some variability with regard to those organizations in terms of what they're trying to do to sustain their operations. And so I would think that some of the organizations are doing a lot in attempting to build an endowment, for example, to work with the Community Foundation themselves, doing those kinds of things to try and cover operational costs. And then the other piece is that some of these organizations are, you know, we support in other ways, i.e. we maybe have a facility, a city facility that's used to house the organization. Think about the museum, for example. So there are some complexities to some of these, and I'm not familiar enough to know what the Watertown Business Association received and or does. I really don't know. And then the other thing that I would add is that I imagine that as I look at these organizations, a good percentage of them are going to be hurt by cuts to federal funding. And I think we need to have a pretty honest conversation about how much support we can provide to them, because I would argue that we're not going to be able to fill that gap as a city, and I think that's going to mean some pretty hard community conversations when services that people are used to receiving in this community suddenly disappear because federal funds have been cut and there's no gap, no way to fill that gap, and that's a concern. You know, you had mentioned Beacon Center. Okay, so they're seeing a federal funding cut. What's the impact? We can't step in and fill every gap. And yet the community need with regard to Beacon Center is pretty significant, I think.
Council, I would say this, as we've gone through this list, and the Beacon Center is an excellent example, as is the Human Service Agency. They're agencies that are providing direct support to our police force. And they're providing resources that if we didn't have these agencies to provide the service, we would have someone on payroll. So it's great discussion. And following our budget philosophy throughout the year, I think we should continue the discussion as situations change.
Because I think it meets a very real community need that if it didn't exist, we'd have citizens in this community with nowhere to go and no opportunity. I have less comfort level with a membership organization like the Chamber of Commerce, where I think, well, okay, you know, I mean, it's a membership organization, right? And we support it because I think the assumption is that there's some value to the community in our support of the Chamber of Commerce. But it's less clear to me what that money is used for with the chamber, if they're just offsetting salaries or, you know, what are they doing? Because then it becomes a little more tricky for me.
Very, very fair point. We do support the chamber through the BBB fund. Have to go back and look at some prior documentation, but I believe we're supporting programs that are promoting sales tax generation in the community, but it should be looked at again.
You know, when we're looking at items of that nature, I mean, that's kind of where some of my point is with getting a presentation. I want to know a little bit more about reserve funds that those organizations have, if those have grown over the years and they can self-sustain. Maybe they can self-sustain. You know, we talk about like contributing to things that drive our BBB. Well, I look more at like the Convention and Visitors Bureau maybe for stuff like that, or like how many of those responsibilities can they draw? What sparks the difference between something like that and then like the private entities that do things to drive sales tax in town. So I think it's just worth a deeper discussion and then just maybe getting clarity for all the parties.
Any further questions on outside contributions?
Maybe not outside contributions, but to add to his statement, based on discussions earlier, we've been asking for this for a while. And for the first time, we have a city manager who's actually been pressing the state to get information back. So we appreciate that because it would be good to know those sources and what is helping and where can we as a council do things for certain businesses or sectors to increase this, like one we talked about earlier tonight, the first agenda item.
Okay, the next slide is your look at where we've been at with personnel expenditures. What I will say here, I won't go into a lot of detail. Took a full-time position out of the city manager's department and turned it into a part-time position, so that has fallen off here, and that's essentially the net minus of one. Two investments that we are making. If you look down on wastewater and solid waste, both of those organizations need some help. As you saw in the enterprise fund, they're fairly healthy in terms of generating an increase in fund balance. And so at wastewater, it's another operator that's needed, especially as we complete $60 million of investments in new state-of-the-art equipment, to have the operators appropriately trained and ability to run the plant efficiently is something that our staff needs. And then on solid waste, it is a on-site manager of the site, and then also a customer service type of person, greeting patrons at the scale and handling the transaction, versus today we pull operators off of heavy equipment that are paid at a higher pay scale to have them deal with the public in a scale house. It's not something either party wants. The operator would rather be operating the equipment, and the public would rather be dealing with someone whose sole job is issue tickets and do the transaction. So a couple of changes there. If there are any questions on any of the other deltas between the numbers, I'd be happy to answer them, but essentially this is pretty flat. Going to end with a chart that I'm not going to talk about a lot. It's really in here for your benefit. We talked
I'm
about.
trying to go get Councilman Mormon.
Okay.
Someone let me back in.
The
Once you leave, you can't go.
we have a recap of the capital improvement fund. We went through this in detail at the meeting on September 22nd. What I point out here is between the capital improvement fund and the cash that we have on hand, we're still positioned to be able to invest about 10.5 million or so into a street facility. We have taken the first step on a potential east fire station with the recent property acquisition. Outside of that, you'll see that most of our expenditures next year in the capital improvement fund are going to be debt service and then street maintenance and the reconstruction of Fifth Avenue in conjunction with the utility replacement in the street. Any questions on the capital improvement fund? So with that, concluded the presentation. There is an appendix, and the appendix is just repeating the slides we went through during the capital improvement discussion for your future reference. Maybe hold or take any questions as we wait for Councilman Mormon. I'm happy to go back to the beginning for Councilman Mormon, but maybe we'll adjourn first.
I would just say thanks for being so detailed with it, Alan. It was pretty easy to digest and for taking the time and getting all this information together.
You know, I'll be honest about some aspects of this budget. Number one, it's a very conservative budget because I'm new to the role. I'm still a bit apprehensive. I don't want to go put together a big, bold spend plan that we maybe can't support. And I don't think that's what you as a council want me to do either. And as we develop the reporting tools going forward, we've got to be able to see this at staff level monthly. And then at least at council level, let's do a deep dive each quarter in our smaller groups.
So it looks like you've kept expenditures where most of society, at least our area, is appreciative of, especially with the state debate and national debate on increasing property taxes, especially in our state. But what are some things, what are some insights that you might have gained on areas that we can generate some revenue?
So we actually went through that. It's actually in the appendix. And Councilman Jurens, I know you had missed the last work session, but there are some ideas out there. And we talked through these in some level of detail. None of these are included in the 2026 plan, nor are we investing in the 2026 plan to get to the growth in population that I think you as a council would want to see. And so we've got some continued areas such as housing and additional stormwater infrastructure, additional public safety where we could be investing to drive faster growth in the community. And these are some sources of revenue. We've talked about the frontage assessments, whether it's stormwater or a street frontage. Chief Rowland has launched the initiative on the fire or medical district and the related funding. And he's doing that to be able to operationally operate an additional station when we can build it. We've talked about the utility infrastructure side. One thing I'll tell you is we need to get closer to WMU, not from the standpoint of a cash grab or a territory grab, but we share a responsibility, and to put this brick firewall between us, I don't think is healthy. And I will drive that at whatever pace you as a council tell me to drive it. But they have needs and we have needs, and they've got to be connected, because right now municipal utilities is putting away resources in advance of wellhead investments, right? Just like we were doing on the stormwater or the sewer side. At some point, we've got to come together and say, how do we grow together and look at things like the hydrant fees or the tapping fees and all of the things our developers come to us and complain about. We need to be at the same table together. User fees are never popular, but there are some direct areas that cost us money that we probably need to look at user fees on. One of the things Chief Toomey and I have talked about with the community service officers is finding a way to utilize that resource to generate revenue for the costs that we incur through the Humane Society and dealing with animals at large. A general obligation bond in light of the property tax situation may be tough to pass. It is something, though, if we look at long-term investments in the community, that we don't want subject to the cyclicality of sales tax revenues. They really lend themselves to the stability of a property tax bond. That's something for us all to understand and you guys to help go sell if we get to that point. And then obviously exploring the grant funding. There are opportunities that we continue to uncover with grants that we know other communities have explored, especially as I've started to meet and talk to personnel in some of the other communities in the state. There's much more we can do there. We're just getting started. There's a long answer to a short question.
You did good. Thanks. We want more, though. We want more revenue.
We do.
Can you do that?
We need more revenue, and really more revenue is generated by more people.
Well, I think the surprise in our discussions, and while I wasn't at that meeting, I caught the gist of it, and that is, if things don't change on the revenue side, our priority project looks really short.
Absolutely right.
And I don't think anyone in Watertown wants to have that short of a list. But if all the money gets spent on one facility, which we mostly agree that needs to be done, what and how long does everyone else have to wait? I caught a statement earlier that the golf course is really coming into fruition with revenue. That's one thing that people love to come to Watertown for. They like to come here for tournaments. And so, I kind of always sided with that crew on, what do you have for a clubhouse? What can additional revenue be generated with a clubhouse? And if we put all the money into the city facility, then we have nothing left for those sorts of upgrades to things that some people think should be the priority.
There, Councilman Jurens, just as a refresher on the slide from the work session, there is only one project that's covered in the CIP plan, and it is the street facility.
I would just say kind of your comments regarding the utilities and partnerships with the utilities, WDC, some of these are all outside entities that we have either government partnerships with or help fund, and the need to get those aligned, kind of like with the housing summit that we did last week, which we were all involved in, or most of us were involved in. If we as a community are not expanding our base of population and workers and housing, we are going to be contracting by nature. Just you look at the pure money involved. If we're not expanding, we're contracting.
There's kind of a number that sticks out to me. And the SRF loan fund in the state that we borrowed $45 million from just on the wastewater plant, and we've got another 20 million of loans, something like that. So they have a debt service requirement of 110% on 20 and 30-year loans. The reason why they have that is they're betting against us. They don't want us caught short if our ratepayers or population decreases. We've got to turn that around and make sure that we're using that 110% of over fees that we collect to reinvest in growth in the community so that we never get into a situation where we got declining population and declining economic activity.
Councilman Jerns.
So we're already receiving emails for an issue of us working on increasing population growth. And that's for the issue coming up on Monday night. So when those individuals that I don't want to build in my backyard, say that I think knowing this big picture would be helpful for them. And I know they're maybe not listening tonight because this goes a long ways and it gets to be an interesting process to sit here and listen to a budget. You did it very quickly, but most people just don't want to care. They just want to care about what is in their backyard. So, as I read through the emails and as we heard from those in the public, there's going to be more of that. And I believe preparing us and knowing that this population growth is a big picture thing and it's extremely important to do it in a responsible way. But those are some things that I appreciate knowing more. And I think getting it out to the public, knowing that we have to grow or we're dying.
I would just throw out that a handful of us were at the WDC annual meeting last night. And I would classify that as not very optimistic about the future. It was a lot about recession in South Dakota that we're seeing. We're not seeing any growth in Watertown. We got to do housing, but the chicken and the egg of, well, who's putting in the infrastructure? Who's running point on it? What are we doing over here? And there was a question last night. I don't know how it was framed, but it was essentially, well, how do we get there? Who's going to put in the infrastructure? Who's going to do this? There was no response. So I think that we need to have a tough conversation about how to add some revenue because I'm not seeing a whole lot of action. I'm not seeing a whole lot of excitement on the horizon. And some of that's not our fault. It's the national economy. But I think we have a duty to look at what we can do to continue to build on this list. When I look at this list, there's not a lot of them that are revenue producing. There's a lot of them that are fixing and just duties as government. So I think we're going to have some tough conversations, and I agree with you, Lynn. I think that what's going on Monday night is a prime example of moving forward.
For those of you who weren't there, certain councilmen who attended actually won a fire pit on a drawing last night.
I have to record it though, because I can't take gifts.
Oh, sorry, Councilman.
No, you're good. Sentiment question, I think just as we go forward with that, what's called an opportunity with housing and growing our population, we need to be thinking in new and inventive ways about how we create that future. And I think we do examine closely with utilities too, those opportunities where we collaborate and maybe create some opportunity. But yeah, just I would say as a council, I think it's reflective that we're all pretty open-minded to trying some things maybe we haven't done in the past and exploring those opportunities of what can we do, what can we don't always have to copy all the other communities that are doing things. Sometimes we can trailblaze a little bit too. So just coming at it from that perspective.
I don't think we're going to get a GO bond passed for the golf course.
Probably not. Good luck.
Any further questions, comments? City Manager? I will go back to something that Councilman Jerns said in regards to the requests from external organizations. The request to get at least some sort of a memorandum of understanding as far as what the city can expect from our donation. and also some level of accounting as far as what is their operating budget. That has been a request from council with the previous council, and it's very nice to see that that is being implemented now. So that has been several years of a request, and I don't think it was, no one was necessarily stopping it. It just takes that moment to step up and actually implement it. So thank you for doing that. Councilman Hoyer.
On that note, Mayor, I would say too, just as we go forward, if we do need to put something into ordinance or policy, that in exchange for these funds, we expect you to face that baseline audit of how are these being utilized? How is your organization doing health-wise and stuff? I think that's legitimate. And if we need to write that, I'm 100% open to it. You know, we're looking at some other licenses where we're requiring audits of how their stuff is operating. I think it's fair that if we're going to take public dollars to subsidize or support these things, that the public gets some transparency as to how they function.
You want to take any questions from anybody else, city manager? I think, well, they've been involved in helping to create it, but just wondering if anyone has any questions, comments. I would just say, I think I could speak on behalf of the entire city council. I know that the city manager, I think he's done a great job. I know that it is not a one-person job. So I want to thank all the department heads, all the people that were participating in it to help bring this forward. This is a very good presentation. I am happier with this presentation than I have been in the past. So I wanted, and just, I appreciate the honest and sometimes uncomfortable conversations about what needs to be faced to get Watertown where we want it to go. And sometimes it's all too easy to avoid those conversations. So thank you. But again, like I said, I know that it's not just a one-person job, so I want to thank everyone on staff who's sat through all this and helped bring this forward.
Are you okay with me going back to slide 1 and taking Councilman Mormon through it?
I gave him the question from the beginning. I got my hand up first.
That's a.
Any future council right items read ahead? Read ahead to read ahead? Public comment? Don't see any. No reason to go into executive session, correct? Take a motion to adjourn. So Councilman Jerns, you made that. I'll give you the motion to adjourn.
I was going to propose we go into executive session
Regard
to a personnel.
Yeah, second.
Somebody seconded, yeah. Somebody seconded. Alan and Peters.
You can do me. That's fine. Who cares?
I like that.
Rock, paper, scissors for it.
Okay. Motion to go into executive session. Any comment on that?
Anybody bring snacks?
I would say I'm not aware of what the topic is.
You're so generous. Thank you.
Yeah, I would say I'm not aware of what the topic is. It's easy to alert us ahead of time. I would just say if you want to go into executive session in the future, just let us know ahead of time, but I won't stop it tonight. We do need this. We do need to vote.
All right.
So all those in favor of going to executive session, say aye.
Aye.
Say nay. Nay. I'm a nay.
Rebel.